The massive glass dome of the Galactic Military Academy stretched across the purple sky of Zentari Prime. Inside the grand hall, hundreds of alien cadets filled the floating seats, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, hums, and growls. This wasn't just any school. This was where the galaxy's future warriors came to prove they were the best. Prince Jiho strutted through the crowd, his 4 muscular arms gleaming with royal tattoos that marked him as Zelkonian nobility. His people had conquered 12 star systems before he was even born. Every step he took screamed superiority, and the other students moved aside like he owned the place. Because in his mind, he did. "Hey, did you guys hear the news?" Jiho's voice boomed across the section where the elite students sat. His translator made his words sound smooth, but there was venom underneath. Near the crystal viewing panel, Minji's body pulsed with soft blue light. She wasn't like the others. Her entire form was made of living energy, her brain more powerful than most planetary computers. When she spoke, her voice sounded like music mixed with mathematics. "You mean about the humans?" Minji's light flickered with what her species used instead of laughter. Finally, someone with sense made that decision. At the back of the section, Hyan was busy sharpening her claws on her arm guards. Her people, the Korthak, were born for war. Every inch of her body was covered in scars that told stories of battles won. Her father commanded the largest war fleet in 3 sectors, and she planned to surpass him. "My dad always said humans were just walking meat," Hyan growled, her voice rough like grinding metal. "Soft, stupid, and die too easy. Why waste time training something that breaks so quick?" The 3 of them represented everything the Academy stood for. Jiho brought royal blood and political power. Minji had a brain that could calculate victory before battles even started. Hyan carried the fighting spirit of the galaxy's most feared warriors. They were perfect specimens, the cream of their species. Around them, other elite cadets nodded in agreement. The thermal twins from the ice worlds, whose bodies could survive in absolute zero. Young Daeho from the gas giant colonies, whose people could fly through toxic atmospheres. Princess Sumin of the rock people, whose skin was harder than most. Armor. They all shared one thing, complete certainty that they were better than everyone else in the galaxy. And at the very bottom of their imaginary ladder sat humanity. "I heard they smell terrible," someone whispered from behind. "My cousin said they're afraid of the dark," another voice added. "They only live for 60 years? That's barely enough time to learn how to walk properly," Jiho said, causing a wave of alien laughter to ripple through the group. The mockery continued until the lights dimmed and Professor Tajan's ancient voice echoed through the hall. His 6 eyes glowed in the darkness as he approached the podium, moving with the careful steps of someone who had seen too much. "Students," his voice carried centuries of wisdom and something else, something that sounded almost like warning. "Today we discuss why the Academy Council banned humans from our institution." The alien students leaned forward, expecting to hear confirmation of everything they already believed. They had no idea they were about to discover the most terrifying truth in the galaxy. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a star map with a tiny red dot blinking in the corner. Professor Tajan's 6 eyes focused on his students as he zoomed in on what looked like the most boring piece of space rock anyone had ever seen. "Kepler 442 system," the old professor announced. "One small human research station. Population, 47 scientists and 12 security personnel." Jiho yawned dramatically, making sure everyone could see how unimpressed he was. 12 guards. My personal bodyguard unit has more people than that." The map shifted, revealing something that made even the most arrogant students pay attention. A massive fleet of dark ships approached the tiny human outpost. 50 full-sized warships, each one bigger than most space stations. "The Hegemony Third Fleet," Professor Tajan continued. 2,000 elite soldiers, advanced plasma weapons, shield technology that could stop a supernova. Minji's crystalline form pulsed faster as she calculated the odds. 50 ships versus 12 humans. This won't even qualify as a battle, it's just cleanup. Hyan leaned forward, her warrior instincts curious despite herself. "Why are we watching an execution? Show us something interesting." But Professor Tajan just smiled with all 6 eyes and pressed play. The footage was grainy, obviously recorded from a damaged surveillance satellite. The alien students could barely make out the human outpost, a collection of metal buildings that looked like they'd been built from spare parts. No impressive architecture, no intimidating weapons platforms, just basic structures that screamed, "We're not important enough to attack." Then the hegemony ships landed. What happened next should have been over in minutes. The alien students expected to see humans running, screaming, maybe trying to surrender. Instead, they watched 12 figures in simple metal suits walk out of the buildings and take positions behind whatever cover they could find. "Are they seriously going to fight?" Deho whispered from his floating seat. "Look at their weapons," Sumin pointed at the screen. "Those aren't even military grade. My people use better guns for hunting small animals." The humans opened fire first. That alone was shocking. Any rational species would try to negotiate, or at least wait for the enemy to make the first move. But these humans just started shooting, like they had a chance of winning. Their bullets, actual metal bullets, not energy weapons, somehow found their targets with disturbing accuracy. Hegemony soldiers in advanced armor started falling, and the alien students couldn't understand how. "Impossible," Minji calculated aloud. "Their weapons can't penetrate hegemony shields." But they were penetrating. Not only that, but the humans were moving in ways that defied basic military training. When one got hit and went down, instead of staying down like any sane creature would, he got back up and kept fighting with what looked like a broken arm. "The footage is corrupted," Jiho declared, though his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Nobody fights with broken bones." Another human took a direct hit that should have killed him instantly. Instead, he used his own body to shield his teammate while continuing to return fire. When his weapon ran out of ammunition, he threw it aside and pulled out a knife against plasma rifles. The hegemony forces had overwhelming numbers, superior technology, and better training. They should have crushed the humans in the first 30 seconds. Instead, the battle dragged on for 18 minutes of the most brutal, incomprehensible fighting any of the students had ever witnessed. When the transmission finally cut out, 11 of the 12 humans were still standing. The hegemony forces were retreating. The auditorium fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the life support system seemed too loud. "That can't be real," Hyun said, but her voice shook slightly. Professor Tajin's ancient face remained expressionless. "This footage is authenticated by 3 separate galactic intelligence agencies. Would you like to see more?" The 15-minute break felt like hours. Alien students clustered in small groups throughout the Academy's crystal corridors, their voices hushed but urgent. The footage they'd just witnessed had shaken something loose in their carefully constructed worldview. Jiho paced back and forth, his forearms gesturing wildly as he tried to convince himself more than anyone else. The video was obviously edited, maybe even completely fake. There's no way 12 primitives could stand against a full hegemony fleet. But his usual swagger was gone. The prince who had strutted into the auditorium now moved like someone who'd seen a ghost. Minji floated nearby, her blue light flickering in patterns that showed deep calculation. "I've run the numbers 17 different ways. The tactical situation was impossible. Even if humans were twice as strong as our data suggests, even if their weapons were 3 times more effective, the mathematics don't work." "Exactly," Jiho jumped on her words. "It's mathematically impossible, so it didn't happen." Hyun remained silent, sharpening her claws with mechanical precision, but her eyes held something new, not fear exactly, but the kind of wariness a hunter develops when tracking unknown prey. When they returned to the auditorium, Professor Tajin was already preparing the next display. This time the star map showed the Proxima Station, a major trade hub that connected 3 different sectors. 6 months after Kepler 442, the professor announced, the Korthak Empire decided to test human resolve. Hyun's head snapped up. Her People's Empire was legendary for its military might. "My father's forces, which battle group?" "The 7th Fleet. Your cousin Minsu commanded the flagship." Now Hyun was paying attention. Minsu was family. But more than that, he was one of the most brilliant military minds of their generation. He'd never lost a battle. The display showed 3 small human vessels facing an entire Korthak battle group. 37 warships designed specifically for destroying other ships. The human vessels looked like toys in comparison. Standard engagement time for this type of encounter is approximately 4 minutes, Professor Tajan noted. The battle lasted 18 hours. 18 hours. The number hit the students like a physical blow. The footage began, and immediately the alien students noticed something wrong. The humans weren't following any recognizable tactical doctrine. Instead of trying to protect their weakest ship, they used it as bait. Instead of maintaining formation, they split up in ways that should have made them easy targets. "What are they doing?" Deho muttered. "They're making themselves vulnerable, but every time the Korthak forces moved to exploit an apparent weakness, they found themselves walking into carefully planned traps. The humans weren't just fighting randomly, they were thinking several moves ahead while making it look like chaos." Minji's form brightened as she tried to process what she was seeing. They're communicating without technology. Watch their ship movements. They're coordinated to a degree that should require quantum-linked computers. On screen, the human vessels moved like parts of a single organism. When one ship took damage, the others instantly adjusted their positions to cover the weakness. When ammunition ran low on one vessel, another would maneuver to share supplies in the middle of active combat. "How are they doing that?" Sumin whispered. "There's no communication array big enough to coordinate those movements." But the most disturbing part wasn't their coordination, it was their decision-making. Every choice the humans made violated basic survival instincts. They consistently chose the most dangerous options available, turning what should have been defensive maneuvers into aggressive attacks. Hion watched her cousin's tactical genius being systematically dismantled by humans who seemed to ignore every rule of warfare. They're not trying to survive, she realized. They're trying to win, even if it kills them. When the footage showed Minsu's flagship finally withdrawing after losing more than half the battle group, Hion's warrior pride cracked completely. "Show." "Just more," she said quietly. The other students turned to stare at her. Hion, who had mocked humans most loudly, was now requesting additional footage. Professor Tajan nodded slowly. "Are you certain you want to continue?" Looking around the auditorium, he could see the change in his students' faces. The casual arrogance was fading, replaced by something more complex. Confusion mixed with the first hints of respect. And underneath, set all growing like a seed in dark soil, was fear. Professor Tajan's 6 eyes dimmed as he accessed files that carried the highest security classifications in the galaxy. The holographic display shifted to show official military documents. There, pages marked with warnings in dozens of alien languages. "What you're about to see led to the creation of a new field of study," the old professor said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "Xenopsychologists call it the human madness doctrine." The first document appeared, a report. From the Vegan conflict, written by a Zelkonian general who had faced human forces directly. Jiho recognized the military seal immediately. It was from his own empire's highest command. "The Vegans made a critical error," Professor Tajan continued. "They used biological weapons against human colonies." The footage began with what looked like a standard military response. Human ships arrived at the contaminated colonies, their crews wearing protective suits as they surveyed the damage. Everything seemed normal until the alien students realized what they were watching. "They're not evacuating," Minji observed, her crystalline form flickering with confusion. "They're collecting samples." Within 72 hours, the humans had not only developed a cure for the Vegan bioweapon, they had created something far worse. A counteragent that would make entire planets uninhabitable for the Vegan species specifically. "That's impossible," Deho whispered. "Bioweapon development takes years, sometimes decades, but the footage showed human scientists working around the clock, their research stations operating with an intensity that bordered on obsession. They didn't just want to cure the disease, they wanted to ensure it could never be used again." "Notice their approach," Professor Tajan pointed to the screen. "They're not developing a proportional response. They're creating something that will end the threat permanently." The next document showed the aftermath. When the Vegans realized what the humans had created, they surrendered immediately. Not because they were defeated, but because they understood that humanity would actually use their devastating weapon. Hyun's warrior instincts screamed as she watched footage of human generals calmly discussing the complete sterilization of vegan homeworlds as if they were planning a dinner menu. They talk about genocide like it's a reasonable option. This is what we call controlled madness, Professor Tajan explained. Humans can escalate any conflict beyond all logical parameters while maintaining perfect emotional control. The next case study showed the Battle of Tau Ceti, where human forces continued fighting even after their command structure was completely destroyed. Individual soldiers made tactical decisions that should have required authorization from high-ranking officers. On screen, a human medic named Young-Soo was treating wounded enemies while under heavy fire. The alien students watched in bewilderment as he risked his life to save a soldier who had been trying to kill him just minutes earlier. "He's helping the enemy," Sumin said, confusion clear in her rocky voice. But then the footage shifted. When Young-Soo discovered that these same enemies had executed human prisoners, his demeanor changed completely. The gentle medic became something else entirely, methodical, efficient, and absolutely ruthless. "What changed?" Minji asked, her processes struggling to identify the variable that had transformed the human so completely. "Their ethical framework," Professor Tajan replied. "Humans have invisible lines that, once crossed, trigger complete behavioral shifts. They can switch from extreme mercy to absolute brutality based on abstract concepts like honor and justice." The footage showed more examples. Humans sharing their food with enemy prisoners, while simultaneously planning raids that would eliminate entire military installations. They would risk everything to save civilian lives, then turn around and discuss weapons that could crack planets. "They're contradictory," Jiho said, his forearms trembling slightly. "How do you predict the behavior of a species that acts against its own survival instincts?" "You don't," Professor Tajan answered simply. "That's why military analysts created the Madness Doctrine. It acknowledges that human behavior cannot be predicted using standard models. The final document showed something that made all the students fall silent. It was a recording of human leaders during the Andromedan crisis, calmly discussing acceptable casualty rates for total victory. They spoke of billions of deaths as necessary costs, their voices steady as they planned for wars that could last centuries. "They don't fight to win," Hyun whispered, finally understanding. "They fight to ensure their enemies can never threaten anyone again." Professor Tajan nodded gravely. "Humans view warfare as a problem to be solved permanently. They will sacrifice everything, including themselves, to protect what they consider important." The auditorium remained silent as the implications sank. Tinasir. These weren't just warriors. They were a species that had weaponized their own willingness to die. The xenobiology files that Professor Tajan accessed next carried warning labels that made even the battle-hardened alien students uncomfortable. Classification Level 2, the highest danger rating in the Galactic database. "Before we examine human behavior further," the professor said, his ancient voice carrying new weight, "we must understand where they come from." The holographic display shifted to show a small blue-green planet spinning slowly in space. It looked peaceful, almost inviting, with swirling white clouds and vast oceans that sparkled in the light of a yellow star. "Earth," Professor Tajan announced, "Homeworld of Humanity. Classification, Death World Class Attuned." The alien students shifted uncomfortably. Most of them had never seen a Class 14 designation outside of theoretical studies. These were worlds so hostile that they should theoretically be uninhabitable. Jiho's forearms crossed defensively. "That can't be right. It looks normal." "Appearances deceive," the professor replied, zooming in on the planet's surface. "Gravity, 1.2 times galactic standard. Atmospheric composition toxic to 67% of known species. Predator-to-prey ratio exceeds safety parameters by 300%. The numbers appeared on screen, and Minji's crystalline form flickered rapidly as she processed the data. "Those readings are impossible. Nothing could evolve in those conditions, but the footage that followed showed exactly what had evolved there. Massive creatures with teeth longer than most aliens' entire bodies. Flying predators that could snatch prey from the ground while traveling at impossible speeds, ocean dwellers that could swallow small spaceships whole, and through it all, humans, not just surviving, but thriving. These creatures, Professor Tejan indicated a massive four-legged beast with claws like swords, humans called bears. They kept them as pets. Pets? Hyun's voice cracked. Her people were legendary warriors, but even they wouldn't consider domesticating something that size. The footage showed human children, actual younglings, playing with creatures that would terrorize most galactic civilizations. A small human, girl named Jimin, was riding on the back of something that looked like a mobile eating machine, laughing as it carried her through a forest filled with even more dangerous creatures. Comparative biological analysis, Professor Tejan continued, bringing up side-by-side displays. A human child's grip strength exceeds that of most adult Zelkonian nobles. Jiho's royal pride crumbled as the numbers appeared. His people were considered among the physically strongest in the galaxy, yet their adults were weaker than human children. Reaction times, the professor continued. Humans process visual information and respond to threats faster than our best fighter pilots. Daiho, whose people were renowned for their reflexes, stared at the data in disbelief. Those speeds would require neural enhancement technology. No technology, Professor Tejan confirmed. This is their natural state. But the most shocking revelation came when the professor showed human endurance capabilities. The footage displayed humans running distances that should have killed them, continuing to function while injured in ways that would incapacitate most species, and working in environmental conditions that rated as hazardous on the galactic safety scale. They don't. No, they're extraordinary, Professor Tejan observed. Watch this training exercise. The screen showed human military recruits practicing combat techniques. They were drilling scenarios that assumed they were the physically weakest species in any conflict. Their training manuals included sections on fighting opponents who were stronger, faster, and better armed. They think they're fragile, Sumin whispered, her rock-hard skin tingling with something she'd never felt before. Genuine fear. The footage showed humans preparing for battle by practicing how to fight while wounded, unconscious, or in conditions that would be lethal to most life forms. They treated extreme physical trauma as minor inconveniences, something to work around rather than something that would stop them. Here's what truly terrifies military analysts, Professor Tejan said, showing footage of human recreational activities. This is what they do for fun. The alien students watched in horror as humans voluntarily threw themselves out of aircraft, climbed vertical rock faces with no safety equipment, and engaged in combat sports where the goal was to render your opponent unconscious. Minji's mathematical processors couldn't handle the contradiction. They voluntarily engage in activities that have significant mortality rates for entertainment, and they consider themselves cautious, Professor Tejan added. Their safety regulations are among the strictest in the galaxy because they assume everyone is as durable as they are. Hyun looked at her own claws, weapons that had made her the pride of her warrior clan. On screen, human children were casually handling tools that would be classified as military-grade weapons on most worlds. They're not monsters, she said, quietly, the words barely audible. They're living weapons who think they're normal, Professor Tejan nodded gravely. Every human is a biological predator, designed by evolution to survive in conditions that would destroy entire civilizations, and they have no idea how dangerous they truly are. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The alien students finally understood why humanity had been banned from the academy. It wasn't to protect the academy's standards, it was to protect everyone else. The next files Professor Tejan accessed carried a different kind of warning, not about physical danger, but about psychological trauma for viewers. Combat psychology reports that had driven seasoned military analysts to request transfers to safer assignments. What you're about to witness, the professor said, his 6 eyes growing dim with something that looked like old fear, is why humans are classified as persistence predators. The holographic display showed a dense jungle on some unnamed world. 12 human soldiers moved through the undergrowth, and at first glance, they looked clumsy and loud compared to other species' elite forces. They're terrible at stealth, Jiho observed, grasping for any sign of human weakness. My people's scouts are silent as shadows. Watch their eyes, Professor Tejan instructed quietly. The alien students leaned forward, focusing on the humans' faces. What they saw defied explanation. The soldiers weren't just looking around randomly. They were processing hundreds of tiny details simultaneously. A bent leaf here, a displaced rock there, the way shadows fell across the ground. They're reading. The environment like a book, Minji whispered, her crystalline form pulsing with confusion. But they don't have enhanced sensory equipment. No equipment needed, Professor Tejan replied. Evolution designed them to hunt in packs across vast distances. They can track prey for days without losing the trail. The footage shifted to show the humans' faces in close-up. Their expressions were constantly changing. Tiny muscle movements around the eyes, slight shifts in posture, microscopic changes in breathing patterns. To the alien students it looked like random facial twitches. They're communicating, Hyon realized with growing horror. Without technology, without sound, without any visible signals. Micro-expressions, pheromone detection, body language analysis, Professor Tejan confirmed. Humans process social information at levels we're only beginning to understand. They can read each other's intentions, emotional states, and tactical plans through signals so subtle that our best detection equipment can't measure them. The footage demonstrated this supernatural coordination as the human unit encountered enemy forces. Without any visible communication, they spread out in a perfect flanking formation. Each soldier knew exactly where the others would be, what they would do, and when they would do it. Impossible, Deho breathed. That level of coordination requires quantum-linked neural networks, but there were no networks, no technology, no visible communication at all. The humans simply moved as one organism with 12 bodies. The most terrifying part came when the unit took casualties. The footage showed a devastating ambush that should have destroyed their coordination completely. Half the squad was down, wounded or unconscious. Their combat ineffective, Sumin stated, applying standard military doctrine. Any rational unit would retreat. Instead, the surviving humans adapted instantly. They covered the roles of their fallen teammates without discussion or planning. A communications specialist took over demolitions. A medic became a sniper. A heavy weapons operator switched to reconnaissance. They don't just work together, Professor Tejan explained. They become each other when necessary. The footage showed something that violated every principle of military psychology. The wounded humans, some barely conscious, were still contributing to the unit's effectiveness. They provided covering fire while lying in their own blood. They called out enemy positions with their dying breaths. They made tactical decisions that saved their teammates' lives even as their own were ending. Why? Minji asked, her mathematical mind unable to process such behavior. What logical reason could they have for continuing to fight while dying? This is what humans call esprit de corps, Professor Tejan replied. They will die for people they've known for minutes if those people are part of their pack. The alien students watched in stunned silence as a human soldier named Kangmin threw himself on an explosive device to save teammates he'd met 3 days earlier. His last act was to smile at them and say something that the universal translator couldn't properly convert, something about seeing them again. They're not rational, Hyon whispered, but her voice carried awe rather than dismissal. They make decisions based on abstract concepts that override every survival instinct. Pack loyalty, Professor Tejan confirmed. Humans will sacrifice themselves for genetic strangers because those strangers are part of their chosen family. It's a behavior pattern that makes them incredibly dangerous. The footage concluded with the remaining humans completing their mission despite impossible odds. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in conditions that should have broken any military unit. How do you fight something like that? Jiho asked, his royal arrogance completely gone. How do you defeat an enemy that becomes stronger? When you hurt them? Professor Tejan's expression was grave. You don't. You avoid making them your enemy in the first place. The alien students sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand why humanity had been banned from the academy. It wasn't about protecting standards or maintaining quality. It was about preventing the rest of the galaxy from learning what happens when you turn humans into professional soldiers. The next set of files Professor Tajan accessed carried no warning, labels at all, which somehow made them more unsettling than everything the alien students had seen before. These were routine combat reports, the kind filed after standard military engagements across the galaxy. This footage comes from the Rigel sector conflict, the professor announced, a minor territorial dispute that lasted 6 weeks. The holographic display showed human forces capturing an enemy fortification. The alien students expected to see the usual aftermath of battle, destruction, chaos, the victors claiming their prizes. Instead, they watched something that broke their understanding of warfare completely. Human soldiers were treating wounded. Enemies with the same careful attention they gave their own injured. A medic named Seojin was using precious medical supplies on prisoners who had been trying to kill her just minutes earlier. She worked with gentle hands, speaking softly to comfort aliens whose language she didn't even understand. Inefficient, Jiho muttered, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Those supplies could save their own wounded. Watch what happens next, Professor Tajan said quietly. The humans set up field hospitals for enemy prisoners. They shared their food, provided clean water, and even gave captured soldiers communication devices to contact their families. Human commanders ensured that prisoners were treated according to regulations that were stricter than most species' standards for their own troops. Minji's crystalline form flickered with confusion. They're helping people who were trying to kill them. Where's the logic in that? Human ethics, Professor Tajan explained. They have rules about how warfare should be conducted, even when their enemies don't follow the same rules. But then, the footage shifted to a different scene from the same conflict. The location looked similar, but something fundamental had changed in the humans' behavior. The same soldiers who had been gentle caregivers were now moving through enemy positions with mechanical precision. Their faces showed no emotion as they systematically eliminated every hostile they encountered. No mercy, no hesitation, no quarter given. What changed? Hyon asked, her warrior instincts screaming that she was missing something crucial. Professor Tajan paused the footage and highlighted a timestamp. This is 12 hours after the humans discovered that these particular enemies had been executing their prisoners. The transformation was complete and terrifying. Seojin, the gentle medic who had risked her life to save enemies, was now methodically hunting down every soldier involved in the executions. Her movements were precise, efficient, and absolutely ruthless. They crossed a line, Sumin whispered, beginning to understand. Humans have invisible boundaries, Professor Tajan confirmed. Cross those lines and their entire nature changes. They can switch from extreme compassion to total brutality in moments. The footage showed the aftermath. Every enemy soldier who had participated in executing prisoners was dead. But the humans had carefully spared anyone who hadn't been involved, even providing medical care to wounded enemies who had fought against them, but hadn't committed what humans considered war crimes. They're judging their enemies, Deho realized. They're deciding who deserves mercy and who deserves death. Based on what criteria? Minji asked, her processors struggling to identify the pattern. The answer came in the next set of files. Human military tribunals, where soldiers were being court-martialed by their own kind. The alien students watched in bewilderment as humans prosecuted their own warriors for what other species would consider normal military actions. A human officer named Wu Jin was being sentenced to prison for mistreating prisoners. The same species that could become absolutely ruthless was punishing its own members for excessive violence. They police themselves, Jiho breathed, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. They limit their own power. Humans have something they call a moral code, Professor Tajan explained. They will execute their own soldiers for violating it, while simultaneously being capable of extreme brutality when they believe it's justified. The footage showed more examples of this impossible contradiction. Human forces risking their lives to evacuate alien civilians from war zones, then turning around and discussing the complete destruction of military targets with casual precision. They would share their last meal with hungry prisoners, then plan raids designed to eliminate entire enemy command structures. They treated wounded opponents with expensive medicine while developing weapons specifically designed to counter their enemies' biological advantages. They're protecting people they don't even know, Hion observed, watching humans shield alien refugees with their own bodies. But they'll kill without hesitation if someone threatens those same people. The human concept of justice, Professor Taijun said. They believe certain behaviors are wrong regardless of species, and they'll enforce that belief even at the cost of their own lives. The final piece of footage showed something that made all the alien students fall silent. Human soldiers were building schools and hospitals in conquered territory, while their own wounded lay in field tents. They were using their resources to help the very people they'd been fighting against. Why? Minji asked, her voice small with confusion. What do they gain from this? Professor Taijun's 6 eyes grew dim. Nothing. They do it because they believe it's right. Humans are the only species that consistently acts against their own immediate interests based on abstract principles. The auditorium remained quiet as the students processed this information. These weren't just dangerous predators. They were dangerous predators with a moral code that made them unpredictable in ways that no tactical manual could account for. How do you fight someone who might show you mercy or might eliminate you completely based on rules you don't understand? Hion whispered. You don't, Professor Taijun replied. You avoid giving them reasons to make that choice. The final classification, level Professor Taijun accessed, required 3 separate authorization codes and a biometric scan from his 6 eyes. The files that appeared carried warnings in languages that some of the alien students had never seen before, ancient scripts that spoke of civilizations that no longer existed. What you're about to witness, the professor said, his voice barely above a whisper, is why the Galactic Council created the Human Monitoring Protocol. The holographic display showed a peaceful star system, the Andromeda sector, where billions of beings lived in harmony across 17 different worlds. Trade routes buzzed with activity, research stations shared scientific discoveries, and diplomatic exchanges happened daily. 6 months ago, Professor Taijun continued, the Andromedan Empire made what they considered a minor territorial adjustment. They claimed 3 human agricultural colonies. Jiho shifted uncomfortably. Agricultural colonies. Those are barely worth claiming. No strategic value, minimal population. The Andromedans thought the same thing, Professor Taijun replied. They expected the humans to negotiate, maybe ask for compensation. Instead, they got this. The footage began with what looked like a standard diplomatic response. Human ambassadors requested meetings, filed formal complaints, followed proper galactic procedures. Everything seemed normal until the alien students noticed the timestamp. This entire diplomatic process took exactly 47 hours, Minji observed. Most species take months to organize a response to territorial disputes. The humans weren't negotiating, Professor Taijun explained. They were buying time. What happened next defied every model of civilized behavior. Within 72 hours of the Andromedan takeover, every human government in the galaxy had unified. Not just cooperated, unified into a single entity with one purpose. Total mobilization. Hion breathed, recognizing the military terminology. The footage showed human industrial capacity converting overnight. Civilian factories began producing weapons. Research institutes abandoned their projects to develop new military technologies. Every human settlement, from the largest cities to the smallest research stations, became part of a vast war machine. They converted their entire civilization into a military unit, Deho whispered, in 3 days. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't the speed, it was the scale. The alien students watched as humans began discussing options that made seasoned warriors like Hion go pale. A human admiral named Jinwoo was presenting tactical options to the unified command. His voice was calm, professional as he described, relocating asteroids to use as kinetic weapons. He spoke of turning gas giants into improvised fusion bombs. He discussed the acceptable losses for achieving total victory, and the numbers he mentioned were in the billions. They're planning to fight the entire galaxy if necessary, Sumin realized. her rock-hard skin trembling. "This is just the preliminary assessment," Professor Tejan noted. "Watch what happens when they finalize their strategy." The humans weren't just preparing for war, they were preparing for wars that could last centuries. They discussed genetic modification to create soldiers who could fight in any environment. They planned weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. They treated the complete elimination of their enemies as not just possible, but preferable. "They're not fighting to win," Minji calculated frantically. "They're fighting to ensure this never happens again." The footage showed human scientists working on projects that violated every galactic convention, weapons that could crack planets, biological agents designed to target specific alien DNA, technologies that could turn stars into weapons. "Look at their timeline," Professor Tejan pointed to the display. "From initial mobilization to deployment-ready superweapons. 17 days. 17 days." The alien students sat in stunned silence as the implications hit them. Most civilizations needed years to develop new military technologies. Humans had gone from peaceful farmers to galactic-level threats in less than 3 weeks. The most chilling part came when the footage showed human leaders discussing acceptable casualties. They spoke of losing entire worlds as necessary sacrifices. They planned for conflicts that would cost trillions of lives, their own and their enemies. The Andromedans surrendered after 19 hours of seeing these preparations, Professor Tejan concluded. Not because they were defeated, but because they realized humanity would literally destroy the galaxy to protect 3 farming colonies, the Simis. Final piece of footage showed the aftermath. The humans didn't just want their colonies back, they wanted guarantees that this would never happen again. They negotiated treaties that essentially put the entire Andromedan Empire under human protection. They turned their attackers into their protectorate, Hyon whispered. "They're not just dangerous when threatened, they're expansionist." "No," Professor Tejan corrected. "They're protective. The difference is that humans consider the entire galaxy to be under their protection now." The auditorium fell completely silent as the students processed what they'd learned. Humanity wasn't just another species, they were a sleeping giant that could awaken at any moment and reshape the galaxy according to their moral code. "How many humans are there?" Jiho asked, his voice barely audible. "Current estimates, 12 billion, spread across 400 worlds. 12 billion potential weapons, each one capable of becoming a force of nature when threatened." The alien students finally understood why humanity had been banned from the academy. It wasn't about protecting anyone from humans. It was about making sure humans never felt they needed protection from anyone else. The auditorium remained silent for long minutes after the final footage ended. The floating seats that had been filled with arrogant chatter just hours before now held stunned alien students who couldn't find words for what they'd witnessed. Jiho's forearms hung limply at his sides, his royal posture completely gone. The prince who had strutted into the hall mocking human weakness now looked like someone who had seen the end of the universe and lived to tell about it. "The ban," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was never about protecting the Academy's reputation." Minji's crystalline form had dimmed to almost nothing, her powerful processors struggling to recalculate everything she thought she knew about galactic politics. "It was about protecting us. From them." But it was Hyon who spoke the truth that none of them wanted to acknowledge. "No. It was about protecting them from us." Professor Tejan nodded slowly, his 6 ancient eyes reflecting centuries of accumulated wisdom. "Explain your reasoning, Cadet Hyon." The Korthak warrior's claws retracted completely, a sign of submission that shocked her classmates. "My people, we're arrogant. We challenge everything that seems strong. If humans came here, if they showed even a fraction of their real capabilities, we'd see it as a challenge to our warrior pride." "And then?" the professor prompted. Hyon's voice became smaller. "We'd provoke them. My cousin, my father, our entire military tradition, we'd keep pushing until they pushed back. And when humans push back..." She didn't need to finish. They'd all seen the footage of what happened when humans decided something was a threat. Sumin's rocky exterior cracked slightly as she spoke. "My people pride themselves on being unmovable, unbreakable. We'd see human endurance as a challenge to prove. We'd keep testing them until they decided your people were a problem to be solved, Deho completed quietly. The terrible mathematics were becoming clear. Every species in the galaxy had traits that would inevitably conflict with human nature. Zelkonian arrogance would provoke human determination. Etherian intellectual superiority would clash with human adaptability. Korthak warrior pride would challenge human protective instincts. We're all potential threats to them, Minji calculated, her voice filled with newfound fear. Not because we want to be, but because of what we are. Professor Tejan activated one final display, a map of the galaxy showing human settlements scattered across hundreds of worlds. Each point of light represented millions of beings who could transform from peaceful farmers into unstoppable forces of nature if they felt threatened. The Academy Council didn't ban humans to protect our standards, he said. They banned humans to prevent us from accidentally starting a war that would end civilization as we know it. The implications hit the students like physical blows. Every casual insult they'd thrown at humanity, every joke about human weakness, every moment of species-based arrogance could have been a death sentence for their entire civilizations. What do we do now? Jiho asked, his royal training completely useless in the face of this revelation. Before Professor Tejan could answer, the Academy's communication system activated with an announcement that made every student's blood freeze. Attention Academy staff and students, we have received an application for enrollment from a human candidate. Cadet Minho Kim has requested admission to our tactical command program. The auditorium erupted in panicked whispers. After everything they'd learned, a human was coming here. Not as a conqueror or a threat, but as a student who wanted to learn. Alongside them, should we warn the other students? Deho asked frantically. Professor Tejan's expression was unreadable. Would you want to know that your classroom might contain the most dangerous being in the galaxy? Someone who could become a force of nature if you accidentally made them feel threatened? Through the massive viewing ports, they could see a small transport approaching the Academy. Inside would be a being that looked harmless, acted with kindness, but carried the potential for unimaginable destruction if anyone pushed them too far. He doesn't know, Minji realized with wonder. The human coming here has no idea what we've learned about his species, which makes him more dangerous, Hyun added. If he knew we feared him, he might act differently. But he's coming here thinking he's just another student. The transport docked with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the entire academy. Somewhere in the corridors, a human was walking among them, polite, friendly, completely unaware that his mere presence had already changed everything. What do we tell him? Sumin asked. Professor Tejan smiled with all 6 eyes. Nothing. We learn from him. We show him the respect his species has earned, and we pray that we're wise enough never to give him a reason to show us why humanity was banned in the first place. The door to the auditorium opened, and Cadet Minho Kim stepped inside, young, nervous, excited to begin his education. He had no idea that he was about to become the most carefully watched, most respectfully treated student in the Academy's history. The age of human isolation was over. The age of careful coexistence had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.